Hey friends, so recently I did a video talking about the Apple USB-C to 3.5 millimeter dongle, talking about my experience with different headphones with it, and briefly in the video I mentioned using heat tubing to give it some more rigidity, and I got some comments asking how I did that. So that's what I'm going to talk through today. This is the Lightning to 3.5 millimeter one that I'm going to use for demonstration purposes, and you can see how flimsy and thin it is. And although the audio quality is surprisingly good for $10 out of these, it does feel kind of cheaply made compared to some of the non-Apple alternatives. And so a lot of people in forums recommend using heat shielding like this to just give it some extra strength, make it a little more robust. And as you can see on this one, I bent it while it was still warm so that when you have it plugged into, say, an iPad, it has a natural curve to it that makes the weight of the headphone cable put a little bit less stress on this joint here. And just run down. You can do the same thing, and I'll talk through that once we get there. But first, assuming that you've not played with shrink tubing before, I'm just going to walk through a couple of things you should know. You can get all kinds of kits like this on Amazon cheap. This is the one that I got here. I think it was between $11 and $13, something like that. A lot of them, the pricing is pretty similar. Comes with a whole bunch of different sizes. Pretty much I use this size right here. It's pretty perfect. It needs to be wide enough to go around the fattest part of the cable. And you'll see that they come in ratios. They say 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1. That's basically a measure of when this gets hot, how many times smaller than it started will it shrink. This is 3 to 1 that I have here. I would generally, for this cable, recommend 3 to 1. You could probably go 4 to 1. Wouldn't recommend 2 to 1. I'm just not convinced with how wide of a tube that you need to go around the fat part that it would be small enough at the end of it to hug how tiny this cable is. So just keep that in mind. Basically, you just use a heat gun like this. I have a Wagner, you can see. I can provide a link if you're curious of where I got it. You can also use a hairdryer if you don't have a heat gun. Just know that it will take a bit longer to use. This, with the heat gun, it's very concentrated and it's very quick. It only takes 10 seconds or less to thoroughly shrink the tubing to where it needs to be. With a hairdryer, you'll probably have to hold it on it for a minute or two. Several minutes when I've done it before it actually shrinks, and you may find that your hairdryer doesn't get hot enough to fully shrink the cable to as small as it can possibly get, so your mileage may vary, but that's an option if you don't have a heat gun and you don't want to go out and spend the money on it just for this cable. You can try to use a hairdryer, but for the demonstration today, I'll be using the heat gun here. So two things as we get going. You'll see that the length that this is cut isn't long enough to go across the whole cable, and so I pretty much give it about halfway up right there, and then it's going to go as far as it goes on the tube there, and then I'll use a second piece to come across from this end. I might snip a little bit of it to length there. That's essentially what I did on this one, and you can see the seam right there where the two pieces came together. A lot of these sets have glue on the inside that melts as the heat is applied to it. It makes this permanent, so make sure you want to do this because you're not going to be able to just cut the shrink tubing off of this. It's pretty much there forever. But as far as hooking two pieces together go, the glue really helps with that. It makes it so that you can't just pick that open and it doesn't like flake off or anything. So this is a bit hot. You don't necessarily need to hold it with something else, but I like to, just to really make sure that my finger is not going to be right there. Hold it like this, turn the heat gun on, and then you pretty much just hold it kind of close and go back and forth a little bit. Try to get it evenly coated with the heat, and then turn it over, make sure you're getting the other side. Now making sure I'm getting the end here just to make sure that piece, most of all, shrinks as far as it can shrink. All right. Now as you can see, looking at the end, that glue is liquefied right there. Don't touch this after you use it. It will be stinging hot, but if we put this down, you can see that that nicely went around the fat part and covered that joint, so it's going to add a lot of strength to right there. I'm not going to worry about bending it like this one until I have the second piece on. This is where you might want to use a pair of scissors unless you want a lot of overlap, because obviously to make it go here, it's going to overlap almost all the way the other direction. So what I did last time is just, you can take a real pair of scissors if you want. I just have the multi-tool right here, so I'm going to use these scissors. I cut about that much or so off the tube. It's just extra length we don't need for this step. All right, same deal, about halfway or 2/3 of the way covering this part is fine. And I can already feel that it's very hot right there, so once again I'm going to use pliers to hold this end. Make sure that's good and out of the way. All right, here we go. Okay, at this point you would decide what kind of bend you're going to want to have in the cable. You bend it maybe like so. And then you can just kind of put anything to hold it in place. I'll use those just to kind of hold it at that angle there and just let it cool off. It will, like I said, be stinging hot when you first do it. And as it cools, the rubber plastic of this tubing will kind of stay like it is there, and then you should be good to go. If you mess up or change your mind about the curve, you should just be able to use the heat gun on it again really quick to make it warm and then straighten it back out or change the curve to whatever you want. Generally, you can play with it to a degree and you're okay. But as you see, using a heat gun, it's very quick to get it how you want it. Like I said, it's a little bit longer if you're using a hair dryer, but you should be able to do it with that without a heat gun. And that adds some rigidity to your cable so that it's a little less prone to bending or snagging. If the cable got snagged on something as you moved, you'd be less worried that it's going to break at the joints. Now, caveat, obviously, the nice thing about the cable being thin and floppy the way it started is that if something's moving down here, the floppiness absorbs a lot of the force. The only downside of a more rigid design like this is when it wants to move, it is putting slightly more strain on where it plugs into the device, so just be conscious of that. This gives a lot more strength to the dongle itself, but potentially lines you up for a little bit more risk at the joint. So just be careful how you're using this. But otherwise, guys, that's pretty much the process. Hope that's helpful. If you have any questions or comments, throw them down below. Love reading that. And otherwise, I hope you found this valuable, and I'll catch you in the next one.